Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. Today I'm going to show you how to make a sandwich that I invented about a month ago, and I call it the Johnny. Now, this is a pretty simple sandwich, and you'll enjoy it a lot. So, the first thing you need to do is fry up some onion and pepper. So, over here, I have a Skittle, and it's already heated a bit. I'm going to add a little bit of oil. And then I'm going to put in the onion. And the bell pepper. And you may want to put a little bit of salt on top of it. That helps the vegetables cook better. So you want these vegetables to be translucent, uh, which usually takes about 5 minutes. Now, the Johnny is essentially a sandwich that's made half with browned ground beef and half with cheesesteak meat, which is traditionally a thinly sliced ribeye. You take a ribeye, you freeze it, then you thinly slice it. That's the traditional cheesesteak meat. For instance, I use this. Now, this is sirloin. You can use this as well. So I should put on here half and half. So it's really a ratio. Yeah, there's no pounds or ounces requirement. It's just a half and half ratio. And essentially, what you do is you make it like you're making a cheesesteak with your onions and your fried peppers and your salt and pepper. But the twist is you're adding an equal part of fried ground beef. Now, that little combination there has a distinct flavor from a cheesesteak, or let's say from a sloppy Joe. It has its own distinct flavor. You're going to have to trust me on that. Try it yourself, and you'll see that it's a different sandwich entirely. And to make it even a little bit more different, I put it in a ciabatta roll. So that's this sort of roll. So instead of a torpedo roll like you put a cheesesteak in, this is a ciabatta roll, and this works well. So let's take a look at our fried peppers and onions and see how they're going. Okay, so these are looking pretty good. What you want to do is you want to put the ground beef on one side of the skillet, and when its juices start flowing, you can fry the cheesesteak portion on the other side of the skillet. Now, I put a little bit of oil in the skillet ahead of time, so I can still fry the cheesesteak portion on the other side. But you want to preserve the juice that comes out of the ground beef because that gives it a lot of flavor. So I'm going to put the ground beef in now, and then I'll put the cheesesteak meat in, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. Now you want to break up the ground beef as it's cooking because you don't want big chunks of ground beef. You want it pretty finely diced inside the skillet. So it helps to continuously push it down and break it up while it's cooking. Otherwise, you'll get clumps. And this is a good time now to add the salt and pepper to season it. Now, I use an 80% ground beef. That gives you a lot of flavor. Um, as you can see, I'm getting the ground beef well browned, and it's releasing a lot of the fat. And then I'm using that fat to help cook the cheesesteak meat. Now the cheesesteak meat I'm using is frozen, so you got to give it a little bit of time in order for it to defrost in the skillet, and then it helps to break it up, and that makes it cook faster. And then ultimately, you're just going to combine the ground beef, the fried onions and peppers, as well as the cheesesteak meat. Just going to combine it all in one mix. And then you're going to put cheese on top of it. And once the cheese melts, you're done. It's that simple. So while that's cooking, you can get yourself a ciabatta roll. And these are nice because they're pre-sliced. Just open it up. And you put the filling in there. And then you can put a tomato slice or a couple tomato slices on top. You put ketchup. You can put avocado. You can put whatever you want in there, really. So I would treat it, as far as toppings go, a lot like a cheesesteak, but it has a different flavor than a cheesesteak. What you end up with is you have this cheesesteak meat flavor, but it's combined with the flavor of browned ground beef, and that combination gives the sandwich a different texture entirely and a different flavor entirely. And you can save this stuff for later. Put it in the fridge. It lasts several days, and you can make sandwiches for several days after that. Just heat it up. Just heat the meat up in like the microwave, and then stick it on top of a ciabatta, and you're good to go again. So let's take a look at this. Now, in terms of cheeses, um, the traditional cheeses for cheesesteaks are American cheese or provolone cheese, and of course there's Cheese Whiz, but that's not real cheese. You can try those. You can try any cheese you want, but I would stick to the traditional cheeses. I'm using Kraft yellow American cheese, but there's other American cheeses that are just as good, if not better, like a Land O'Lakes white American cheese that you might get from the deli counter. That's really an excellent cheese to use in this kind of sandwich. So in a minute, I'm going to mix these two meats together because it looks like the cheesesteak meat is just about done. But I got to be careful. I don't want to mix still raw cheesesteak meat in with ground beef because it might not fully cook. And you don't want raw meat in your sandwich. So let's take a look at this. You can see that it's pretty greasy. Of course, if you don't like all that grease, you can drain it before you put the cheese on, and then melt the cheese. It helps to melt the cheese by putting a cover on top of it. So I'm going to put a cover on top of this skillet because the um, the steam gets trapped underneath the cover, and that pushes down on the cheese and it melts it much faster. So you can see that just about all the pink is gone from both the ground beef and the cheesesteak meat. So that means it's done. When there's no more red, then you're done. You don't want to overcook it or dry it out. Uh, so once the whole thing's brown, that's when you should combine the two, and then leave the heat on and put the cheese down. Let the cheese melt, and once it's melted, you can turn the heat off. Just leave it in the skillet because you don't want to burn it, and you don't want to burn the cheese either. So at this point, I think I'm ready. I'm going to combine the two meats. I'm going to add the cheese. I'm going to put a cover on it, and maybe a minute or two later, it'll be melted, and I'll turn the heat off, and then I'll be ready to put it in the sandwich or in the roll. So at this point, I'm going to mix the meats together. Now, in terms of the cheese, I just use sliced cheese, and I cover the entire thing with it because you want a very cheesy flavor. So I'm going to put the cover on for about a minute or two. Now, in terms of the meats that you're using ground beef and you're using cheesesteak meat. So these are both fairly inexpensive meats. Now, not all cheesesteak meats are the same. I used a pretty high quality cheesesteak meat, which is made with sirloin. Even better would be ribeye. But you can get less quality cheesesteak meats, like Steakum, for instance. Um, if that's all you have, that's what you should use. But if you have access to a better cheesesteak meat, definitely use that. It's going to taste better than a Steakum. Uh, Plus, with the Steakum, you have to break it up. The cheesesteak meat that I used is frozen, and it comes apart. It's already broken up, and when it cooks, you can break it up really easy, and it forms little pieces. Whereas something like Steakum, um, you would have to take the frozen slab, break it up into little pieces while it's frozen, in order to get smaller pieces of cheesesteak meat, which is what you need for this sandwich. So um, it's a fairly inexpensive sandwich to make. I mean, it's on a budget. It's a pretty reasonably priced sandwich. Now let's check on the cheese and see where we are. Okay, so all the cheese is almost completely melted. So at this point, I can turn the heat off because I don't want to burn, and I just want the cheese to melt. And then that's when you can serve it. So I'll turn the heat off right now. Now this recipe is 50% ground beef, 50% cheesesteak meat. So you can make as much of this as you want or as little as you want. So you can serve an army with this, or you can just serve yourself. So it's the ratio that you have to remember. All right, so I've got my ciabatta roll, and now I'm going to serve this on here and show you what the final product looks like.